Hello there and welcome. Tonight, let me take you softly by the hand and lead you into the dusky mists of the past, a world far colder and harsher than our own. Imagine the distant shores of Scandinavia, where icy winds cut through the fjords and fires flickered inside longhouses that smelled of smoke and salted fish. This is where the Vikings lived. And while stories often paint them as fearless warriors with axes and dragon-headed ships, tonight we will slow down, step away from the clang of swords, and listen instead to the whispers of the women who stood behind those warriors. For Viking women, life was not a romantic saga filled with adventure and freedom. It was a life of endurance, of sacrifice, and of relentless labour. Tonight, I will share with you the story of why their lives were so brutal. It will not come in the form of a lecture, nor a list of dry facts, but rather as a quiet journey through their world. A story told as though you were sitting beside a fire, eyelids heavy, letting the rhythm of history carry you toward rest. So make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you'd like, let the day settle behind you, breathe in deeply, and exhale slowly. For the next little while, you are drifting across time, where sails catch the northern winds, where long winters press against the spirit, and where women, whose names history rarely recorded, carried burdens as heavy as stone. Picture a Viking village in the early dawn. The sun barely creeps over the horizon, its light pale and weak. Frost clings to the earth like tiny shards of glass. A woman rises before the men, before the children, before the livestock stir. Her tasks begin immediately. She must stoke the embers of last night's fire, prepare the meagre morning meal, and ensure that the household is ready for another long day. Sleep is a luxury she seldom enjoys. Every morning begins the same, with quiet determination, because the survival of her family depends on her strength. Unlike the warriors who carried swords, her battles were against hunger, illness, and loneliness. The fields had to be tilled, though her hands were raw from cold. The wool had to be spun, though her body ached from bending over the loom. Food had to be stored and preserved for the endless winters where darkness lasted longer than daylight. Viking women were, in many ways, the backbone of their society, but this did not spare them from hardship. Instead, it made them invisible pillars, always carrying weight, rarely celebrated. Imagine her waiting, too. Waiting as her husband, her brothers, or her sons vanished onto longships, chasing riches, glory, or simply survival. The horizon swallowed them, and with it came uncertainty. Would they return? Would she raise their children alone? Would strangers arrive to plunder the village while the men were away? Each day of waiting was heavy, filled with silence and fear. Life for Viking women was not only about survival in the physical sense. It was about navigating a world where power and voice belonged to men. Though women could hold property, though they could manage farms, their autonomy was fragile. Marriage was rarely a matter of choice, but of alliance and necessity. A young girl could be promised to a man she barely knew, her future tied not to her dreams but to negotiations carried out between families. And if that man fell in battle or at sea, she would be left to pick up the pieces, to hold her family together with nothing but willpower. Yet within this harsh existence there were moments of quiet strength. A woman's voice, though muted, still carried in the household. She could shape her children, teaching them stories of the gods, instilling in them resilience. She could decide how food was rationed, how the home was maintained. In her loom and her spindle, she wove not only cloth but continuity, the survival of a people who thrived despite the cold, the hunger, the endless uncertainty. And when winter storms raged across the North Sea, when howling winds shook the walls of the longhouse, Viking women sat by the hearth, whispering tales that kept their children's eyes wide with wonder. Stories of Thor and Freya, of Odin's wisdom and Loki's mischief. In these moments, she was more than a labourer. She was memory, myth and magic. She was the keeper of the flame that bound generations together. Still, we must not let the warmth of the hearth soften the truth. Life was brutal. Childbirth without medicine was perilous. Disease swept through villages without warning. Hunger gnawed at bellies when harvests failed. And yet, day after day, Viking women rose again, carrying burdens unseen by the sagas. Tonight, our journey has only just begun. We have stepped into the doorway of their world, felt the chill of the dawn, and heard the crackle of the fire. But beyond this doorway lies much more. The customs that bound them, the losses they endured, and the quiet rebellions that flickered in their hearts. For now, rest in this image. A woman cloaked in wool, standing at the threshold of her longhouse. The sea winds whip her hair as she gazes toward the horizon. Her eyes are steady, though she carries the weight of countless unseen battles. This is where our story begins, with her strength, her silence, and the brutal beauty of the life she endured. The morning stretches into day, and with it comes the unrelenting rhythm of survival. The woman has already prepared the meal. Thin porridge, sometimes sweetened with honey if fortune has smiled, but more often plain, filling only enough to silence the growl of an empty stomach. Children crowd around the hearth, their hair tangled, cheeks flushed from the chill seeping through the timber walls. They eat quickly because there is no time for leisure. Every hour of light is precious, every moment needed to secure what little they have. She gathers the tools of the day, a wooden rake, a spade, the loom that waits for her hands. The tasks are endless, cyclical, demanding. Viking women were farmers as much as they were mothers, and though the image of Viking men on ships has dominated our memory, it was the women who kept the soil turned, the animals fed, and the homes standing upright against the winds. Without them, no warrior could sail away, no conquest could be pursued. Yet history does not praise these labours. It was their fate to be both essential and overlooked. The land itself was unforgiving, the soil was rocky, stubborn. The winters were long, pressing darkness upon them for months at a time, and summers, though filled with fleeting brightness, were brief. Crops needed to be planted, tended, harvested, and stored before the seasons shifted. For once the frost returned, there was no second chance. A woman's hands bore the story of her life, calloused, cracked, weathered by cold and labour. Each scar was a mark of devotion, not to glory or wealth, but to survival. The longhouse, though shelter, was no gentle refuge. The air was thick with smoke from the hearth, the only warmth for the family and their livestock, who often shared the space in winter. The smell was pungent, wool damp from snow, hay trampled by hooves, salted fish drying in the rafters. Children coughed, and their mothers pressed herbs to their chests, whispering prayers to gods who often seemed distant. A healer might come, but remedies were crude, mixtures of plants, rituals, charms carved into wood or bone. Life and death balanced on fragile strings, and more often than not, those strings snapped. Still, women bore children because families depended on them. Yet childbirth was a battlefield of its own. Imagine the dim light of a fire, a woman crouched in pain, surrounded by her kin. No physicians, no clean instruments, only the knowledge passed down from mothers before them. Some women emerged, cradling life in their arms. Others bled quietly into the earth, their cries fading into silence. Infant mortality was high, and grief was constant. Yet life moved forward because it had to. Death was as common a companion as breath. There were moments when the world seemed to soften. During feasts, when men returned with spoils, the tables were laid with mead, roasted meat and bread. Laughter filled the hall, and for an evening, the weight of survival seemed lighter. But even in celebration, women worked. They brewed the ale, they prepared the meals, they served the men who boasted of their raids. Their reward was not honour, not song, but the quiet satisfaction that their household had survived another season. Marriage, too, was less about love than about alliance. A daughter might be promised as a bridge between families, her life traded for land, livestock, or peace. She had little say in the matter, though her role was crucial. Her duty was to secure lineage, to bear children who would continue the family's name and wealth. A woman's worth was measured not by her laughter, her dreams, or her wisdom, but by her ability to endure, to bring forth sons, to manage farms, to maintain order while men pursued their violent glories. But do not mistake their silence for weakness. Viking women carried a quiet authority, one woven into the very fabric of their society. While men fought wars far from home, women ruled the hearth. They were stewards of land and livestock, judges of disputes within the household, and keepers of tradition. They held the keys to the home, a symbolic power, one that signified their control over the heart of daily life. In their weaving and spinning, they sustained not only their families but their people, ensuring that clothing, sails and trade goods were always at hand. And then there was the waiting, always the waiting. Each time a ship departed, carrying men across unknown seas, women were left behind with little more than hope. They stood on the shore, their skirts whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on the horizon until the sails vanished. Months, sometimes years, stretched into silence. Letters did not come, word rarely travelled. A woman might spend her days preparing for a husband who would never return, her nights listening to the waves, wondering if his bones lay beneath them. Loneliness became a constant shadow, and yet she carried on because she must. Stories whispered around the fire reminded her of gods and goddesses who mirrored her struggles. Freya, the goddess of love and war, was said to weep golden tears for her lost husband. These tales brought comfort, not because they promised rescue, but because they reflected the truth of her existence. Longing, endurance, sorrow woven with strength. So much of Viking life was built upon appearances of strength and glory, but beneath that facade the women bore the unspoken burdens. Their lives were brutal, not because they lacked courage, but because their courage was demanded every day, in every breath, without pause or recognition. As daylight fades, she gathers her children close, weaving stories into their dreams as she spins wool beside the fire. Outside, the wind howls against the longhouse, but within, her steady voice holds back the darkness. Her world is harsh, but her presence is a shield, invisible yet unbreakable. And though history rarely carved her name into stone, she was the foundation upon which the Viking world stood. The seasons turn slowly in the north, and each one brings its own kind of trial. When spring arrives, it does not come gently. It creeps across the land like a hesitant guest, melting the snow in patches, leaving behind mud that clings to boots and makes every step heavy. For Viking women, spring is not a season of leisure or blooming beauty, but a time of restless labour. Seeds must be planted quickly before the fleeting warmth can slip away again. She kneels in the cold soil, pressing each seed into the earth with care, knowing that the family's survival will depend on whether these small beginnings can endure the fickle weather of the north. Her children work beside her, their small hands carrying baskets of grain, their faces flushed by the effort. A child's laughter rings out for a moment, but it is quickly silenced by the seriousness of the task. Work is never far from play. Even the young must understand that life here does not forgive idleness. She guides them, her voice soft but firm, passing on the knowledge her own mother once gave her. How deep to plant, how to watch the skies, how to read the soil, as though it were a book written in another language. Her husband is away at sea, chasing fortunes on distant shores. She has not seen him for months, perhaps longer. Sometimes she hears whispers in the village of raids gone wrong, of ships swallowed by storms, of men captured or killed far from home. But she silences these thoughts. Hope is her only shield against despair, and she clings to it even as she feels its weight pressing against her heart. She cannot afford to crumble. The children need her steady. The land needs her strong. Spring also brings trade. Ships from other settlements drift into the fjord, bringing furs, amber and iron, exchanging goods that a household cannot produce alone. She steps into the bustle of the market with caution, clutching a small pouch of wool she has spun through the long winter nights. The men dominate the haggling, but she knows her worth and the value of her work. Her woven cloth may not gleam like silver, but it is indispensable. It keeps bodies warm, it sails ships across seas, it binds the very rhythm of life together. She negotiates with quiet determination, her eyes sharp, her back unbending. Yet, even here, there is risk. The presence of outsiders means danger. Strangers may bring violence, disease or temptation. She must protect her daughters from curious glances, keep her sons close to her side. The world beyond her village is wide and uncertain, and she knows all too well how quickly fortune can turn into ruin. When summer finally takes hold, the land bursts into a brief, frantic season of growth. The air is warmer, though still cool by southern standards, and the days stretch long, the sun lingering well into the night. This is the season of hardest work. The animals must be driven to pasture, milk collected daily, butter churned with arms already sore from weaving and harvesting. She rises with the dawn and rests only when the stars return, her body aching with the relentless pace. Summer is also when danger prowls closest. Raiders do not only sail to distant lands, sometimes they descend upon neighbouring villages. The woman must always be prepared for the sudden terror of fire on the horizon, the sound of shouting in the night. If her husband is gone, she is the defender of her children, the guardian of the home. With little more than a blade or an axe meant for wood, she must stand firm. Fear may seize her chest, but she will not abandon her household. To flee is to lose everything. To fight is to risk death. Neither path offers mercy. There are moments when joy flickers through the hardship, though brief and fragile. A child's first steps across the grass. A daughter learning to spin her first thread, proud and clumsy. A son's laughter as he chases the goats through the pasture. These moments do not erase the burden, but they remind her why she endures. In the quiet of night, when the children sleep, she sits by the fire and lets herself feel the warmth not only of the flames, but of her love for them. She knows that even if her name will never be sung, even if her struggles will be forgotten, they will carry her spirit forward. As autumn approaches, the pressure mounts again. The harvest must be brought in quickly before frost returns. Every sheaf of grain, every barrel of salted fish, every strip of dried meat becomes a safeguard against starvation. She works alongside others in the village, hands moving in rhythm with scythes, baskets and knives. There is no room for error, no time for laziness. A poor harvest means hunger, and hunger in the north is a merciless enemy. Even as she bends over the fields, her mind is divided. She thinks of her husband, if he is alive, if he remembers her face, if he longs for the warmth of home as much as she longs for certainty. She wonders if the sea has claimed him, if his body lies beneath waves she will never see. But she cannot linger in mourning for what is not yet known. She pushes the thoughts away, focusing on the grain in her hands, the task before her. Autumn nights bring feasts, smaller than those of victory, but still filled with mead, song, and fleeting laughter. She joins, not out of luxury, but to remind herself that community binds them all together. They share stories, they share food, they share hope. Without one another, survival would be impossible. Then comes winter again, long and endless. Darkness stretches across the land, swallowing the light. The family huddles together in the longhouse, the fire a fragile defense against the cold. Outside, the world is silent, blanketed in snow. Inside, she spins wool, mends clothing, and whispers stories to keep her children's minds from fear. Each tale carries lessons: courage, cunning, endurance. She tells them of gods who wander in disguise, of women who outwitted men, of spirits that watch from the woods. In her voice, myth and memory blend, giving shape to a world that is as mystical as it is harsh. And through it all, the brutality of life never loosens its grip. Illness creeps into the longhouse without warning. A cough that lingers, a fever that burns too hot. Herbs and prayers can only do so much. She holds her child's hand, praying to gods who may or may not hear, her own tears falling silently. Sometimes the child survives, sometimes the bed is left empty. Grief, like hunger, becomes another companion she must carry without choice. This is the rhythm of her life, the endless cycle of seasons, of labour, of fear, of fleeting joy. Her existence is not carved in stone, not remembered in sagas of conquest, but in the silence of her world, she shapes the future. Every thread she spins, every seed she plants, every child she raises is part of a story greater than herself. And though her life is brutal, it is also unbreakable, bound by resilience that no storm can shatter. The long winters of the north press heavily upon the spirit, and in these months the strength of Viking women is tested most cruelly. Darkness becomes an almost unbroken companion, stretching across the land until daylight feels like a fleeting visitor. The fire in the longhouse must be kept alive, always fed with wood carefully gathered before the snow sealed the forest paths. If the flames die, the cold seeps in with merciless speed, threatening to freeze not just water in its bowls, but the very breath in their lungs. She knows this, and so she guards the hearth as one might guard treasure. For in truth, it is more valuable than gold. It is life itself. The air inside the longhouse grows thick. Smoke lingers, clinging to hair and cloth, filling the lungs until coughing becomes as common as breathing. Animals shift restlessly nearby, their heat adding to the household's survival, but also bringing filth, noise and disease. She rises countless times in the night to soothe a restless child, to stir the fire, to hush the lowing of a cow, to push back the shadows that creep into her mind. Sleep is shallow, broken and rare. The burden does not ease, even in the hours meant for rest. And yet, winter is also the time when stories are strongest. In the flickering light of the hearth, when winds howl against the walls and snow buries the village in silence, her voice becomes the thread that holds the family together. She speaks slowly, weaving tales of gods and heroes, of tricksters and monsters, her words wrapping around her children like a second blanket. Each story carries more than entertainment. It carries memory, history, and meaning. Through these stories, she reminds them that they are not alone, that countless generations have endured winters just as long, just as bitter, and emerged alive. But beneath the comfort of story lies the quiet truth. Many will not emerge. Starvation stalks the village like an unseen predator. The barrels of dried fish, the sacks of grain, the wheels of cheese, all must be rationed with ruthless care. A careless hand, an indulgent meal, could mean hunger weeks later when the snows still refuse to melt. She measures each portion with precision, though her own stomach aches with emptiness. Children cry for more, but she shakes her head softly, whispering promises that tomorrow will bring another meal. It is not cruelty, but survival, and she carries the guilt in silence. Sickness, too, claims its victims most often in winter. The cold weakens the body. The crowded longhouses spread illness like fire through dry grass. When fever strikes, she becomes both nurse and priestess, applying poultices of herbs, whispering prayers to gods who seem distant. Sometimes the fever breaks, and joy floods her heart like the return of spring. Other times she feels the warmth of life fade beneath her touch, and she must close a child's eyes, her own face stone though her heart is shattered. There is little time to weep. The living still need her. The chores remain unending. Grief becomes another weight she must carry, unacknowledged, but always present. Amid these trials, women sometimes turn to one another. While the sagas rarely mention it, the bonds between women were threads of steel woven through daily life. A neighbour might step in to share bread, to help with a birth, to offer a story when grief had silenced words. These friendships were quiet sanctuaries, built not of luxury but of necessity. Alone, survival was nearly impossible. Together, their endurance became greater than the sum of their parts. Yet, even in the heart of winter, the shadow of men's absence lingered. Ships had sailed months ago, and there was still no word. She sometimes dreamt of their return, the sound of boots upon the frozen ground, the door flung open, the embrace of a husband long missed. But dreams are fragile, and more often than not, reality delivered disappointment. Some ships would never return. Some men would never again see the lands they had left behind. And when spring came, she might receive news not of a reunion, but of death, brought by a traveller, a rumour, or a stray piece of silver from a raid that had ended in blood. The burden of widowhood was one of the harshest fates for a Viking woman. Without a husband, her place in society became precarious. Though laws allowed her to inherit land or property, her authority was constantly questioned, her security fragile. Suitors might circle, some offering protection, others seeking only to claim her home and goods. She would have to choose, not with the freedom of desire, but with the calculation of survival. Marriage, once again, was not a matter of love, but of strategy, a shield against a world that left little room for solitude. Through all this, she found strength in small acts, the rhythm of her loom, the spinning of wool, the quiet hum of a song as she worked. These were anchors steadying her against the chaos of life. In the threads she spun, she saw the echo of her own endurance. Thin, fragile when alone, but when woven together, strong enough to withstand years, storms, and endless use. The very sails that carried ships across oceans began as wool twisted between her fingers, her labour woven into the fabric of exploration and conquest. Children, too, were both burden and blessing. They demanded constant attention, constant feeding, constant protection, and yet they were also the only promise of continuity, the living proof that her struggles were not in vain. Each time she wrapped a child in a cloak she had woven, each time she fed them from food she had preserved, she planted the seed of the future. That future might be uncertain, might be cruel, but it was still a future, and that was enough to keep her moving forward. When winter finally began to loosen its grip, when the first trickles of water carved through the snow, she felt not relief but urgency. The cycle began again, and her body must endure another year of labour. She knew the brutality would not ease, but within her heart burned a quiet fire that matched the hearth she guarded so carefully. It was the fire of persistence, the fire that kept her people alive when the land and sea seemed determined to swallow them whole. Her story, like the stories she whispered to her children, was not carved into sagas of warriors or gods. It was written in soil, in smoke, in tears shed in silence. It was the story of a woman who endured, and in enduring, carried her people through the brutal beauty of life in the Viking Age. Spring returns, as it always does, though its arrival feels more like a cautious negotiation with the land than a triumph. The snow retreats slowly, leaving behind wet earth and broken branches. The air smells of thawing soil and smoke from the fires that never cease through winter. For the woman, spring means renewal, but not in the way of bright flowers and leisure. It is instead a season of urgency, when the family's survival must be secured for the year ahead. She walks the muddy fields, eyes narrowed, scanning the ground for signs of life. Seeds must be pressed into the soil quickly before the frost can change its mind and return. Every movement of her hands is deliberate, every seed placed with the care of someone who knows that a single miscalculation could mean hunger come winter. The children trail behind her, carrying baskets of barley and rye, their laughter softened into silence by the weight of responsibility. She speaks gently but firmly, guiding them as her mother once guided her, ensuring that the knowledge of survival does not vanish with time. Her husband, if he has returned from the sea, joins briefly in the planting before he is drawn back to duties of trading, raiding, or preparing for yet another journey. If he has not returned, her work doubles. She must act as both farmer and guardian, her hands blistered from the spade, her mind alert to the dangers that creep into every corner of village life. The absence of men is not rare. Ships leave in one season and often do not return until the next, if at all. Their absence becomes a normal rhythm, one that women adapt to with a stoic acceptance that borders on invisibility. The village itself awakens with the spring. Women gather at the river, scrubbing clothes against stones, the icy water numbing their skin until their hands turn red. They share words in low tones, exchanging stories of the winter's hardships. A child lost to fever, a cow that did not survive the cold, a harvest barrel that spoiled too soon. There is comfort in sharing these burdens, even when no solution exists. It is in these quiet gatherings that women find fragments of solace, moments where their voices carry freely without the weight of male judgment. As the days lengthen, preparations for summer raids begin. The men gather in groups, repairing ships, sharpening weapons, and boasting about the wealth they will return with. Their energy is loud, brash, filled with the promise of adventure. The women, however, stand at the edges, watching silently, already imagining the months of absence, the waiting, the uncertainty. Each nail driven into a ship's hull is another thread of worry woven into their hearts. They do not argue, for the system is unyielding. Instead, they ready themselves for the long season of loneliness to come. In these moments, women also prepare in their own way. They set aside food, they organise the household, they whisper instructions to their children about what must be done if danger approaches. They are not passive figures left behind. They are commanders of the home front, leaders in silence. Yet history seldom remembers such preparation, as though their endurance was less heroic than the swinging of a sword. When summer arrives, its brightness almost feels mocking. The sun lingers late, the fields burst with green, but the woman's heart carries the heaviness of absence. She works from dawn until dusk, her back bent beneath the relentless labour of tending crops, milking goats, spinning wool. Her children learn quickly that their help is no longer optional. A daughter takes up the spindle, clumsy fingers fumbling but improving with each day. A son gathers wood and tends the animals, his small frame already hardened by necessity. Their childhood is shortened, traded for survival, and she watches them with both pride and sorrow. The market days in summer bring a rare taste of variety. Traders from distant lands arrive with goods strange and wondrous, glass beads that catch the light, fabrics dyed in colours brighter than the northern sky, spices whose scents linger in the air. For a moment, life feels larger, richer. Yet, the market also reminds her of the divide. While men barter for weapons or foreign luxuries, women trade their woven cloth, their dairy, their wool. Their goods sustain life, but they are valued less, seen as common, domestic, unworthy of praise. She knows better, of course. A sword cannot keep a child warm through winter, but a woolen cloak can. There are nights when, after a day of endless labour, she lies awake beside the hearth, staring into the flickering flames. Her thoughts drift to her husband, or to the memory of him if he has not returned. Does he think of her in the chaos of raids? Does he recall the taste of her bread, the sound of her voice, the feel of the longhouse on a cold night? Or is she only a shadow in his memory while gold and battle consume his days? These thoughts are dangerous, but they come unbidden, creeping into her heart like the chill that seeps through the cracks in the walls. Sometimes there is news. A trader may bring word of a raid, of villages burned, of men captured or killed. Each mention is a knife of fear, each rumour a spark of hope or despair. The uncertainty is a constant companion, heavier than hunger, sharper than cold. She waits, as she always has, knowing that waiting's its own form of battle. By autumn, her focus sharpens once again. The fields must be harvested quickly, the food preserved, the supplies secured for the long night ahead. She works with precision, her hands moving as if guided by instinct honed through generations. The children follow her lead, learning not just the tasks but the rhythm of survival itself. Together they fill barrels, weave cloth, prepare for the silence of winter. And always there is the quiet fear that the harvest will not be enough, that the winter will be too long, that sickness will come again. But she does not speak of it. Her strength is measured not in the absence of fear, but in her refusal to let it show. To her children she is unbreakable, the steady flame that never dies. Her life is not a saga told in grand halls. It is a story of endurance, written in soil, smoke and silence. It is brutal, unrelenting, yet within it lies a resilience that shapes the very foundation of her world. For while men chase glory across seas, it is women who hold the land, the hearth, and the future in their hands. The hearth burns low as autumn deepens, and the village hums with urgency. Every household rushes to gather what can be stored, what can be preserved, what can be hidden away from the unforgiving cold that is already creeping into the nights. The woman's hands never stop. She lifts, carries, chops, dries, salts and sews, her body aching from the endless rhythm of preparation. Yet there is no room for complaint. Every task is another thread of survival woven into the months ahead. She oversees the slaughter of animals, a grim but necessary ritual. The cries of goats and pigs echo through the chill air, and she steels herself, focusing not on the loss but on the meat that will sustain her family when the snow buries the land. Blood is caught in bowls, fat is stored for tallow, hides are stretched and salted for clothing. Nothing is wasted. This is not cruelty, but a pact with the land. Take what you must and respect what you take. Her children watch with solemn eyes, absorbing the lesson not through words but through repetition. They will carry this knowledge long after she is gone. At the loom, she works by firelight late into the night, spinning wool into thread, weaving thread into cloth. The rhythmic pull and push of the loom becomes a meditation, a quiet beat against the chaos of daily labour. Her cloth will clothe her family, will sail the ships of men, will be traded for tools and salt. Though others may see it as simple domestic work, she knows it is power. In every thread lies the strength of survival. And yet no saga sings of these threads, no poem immortalizes the calluses on her hands. Marriage, too, remains a constant shadow. In autumn gatherings, when families share food and news, young girls are often spoken of in whispers, not about their laughter or skills, but about their worth as brides. Promises are made in hushed voices, negotiations between fathers and uncles, while mothers stand silent at the edges. A daughter might be promised to a man much older, or to one she has never seen, her future bartered for land or livestock. The woman, too, was once a girl whose life was decided in such a way, and she watches her daughters with a protective ache in her heart. She knows she cannot shield them entirely, can only teach them endurance, the same way she was taught. There are rare moments of joy, fleeting but sharp. The autumn feast, when mead flows and roasted meat fills the hall, brings a temporary sense of abundance. The men boast of voyages and raids, of wealth seized and enemies defeated. The women, meanwhile, smile faintly, pouring ale, carrying food, ensuring that the children stay close. Their stories are not told aloud, but in glances shared across the table. Silent acknowledgements of labour unseen, of burdens carried without recognition. The woman's power, though quiet, sometimes surfaces in unexpected ways. In disputes over land or inheritance, her voice can matter. The laws of her people allow her to hold property, to divorce, to reclaim her dowry if she chooses. These rights are more than many women elsewhere could claim, yet they remain fragile, easily overshadowed by the louder authority of men. She navigates these rights carefully, knowing that too much boldness can draw resentment, but too little can leave her powerless. It is a delicate balance, one that requires not only strength but wisdom. Winter closes in again, earlier than expected, with biting winds that whistle through cracks in the walls. Snow falls heavily, blanketing the fields, silencing the world outside. Inside the longhouse, the family clusters near the fire, wrapped in wool and fur, their breath visible in the chill air. The woman moves constantly, feeding the fire, stirring the pot of stew, mending torn cloaks, soothing restless children. Rest is a concept she no longer expects. Her body aches with a weariness that never fades, yet she endures, because endurance is all that is left to her. It is in winter that loneliness sharpens most. If her husband is gone, the silence of his absence grows louder than the howling wind. If he has returned, his presence is often a reminder of the gulf between their worlds. His tales of battle and plunder clashing with her quiet, endless struggle for survival. He may see himself as a warrior, a hero. She knows herself as something different, not celebrated but essential. Both truths coexist, though only one is remembered. There are nights when she allows herself to grieve, not openly, not in front of her children, but in silence, when the house has quieted and the fire is low. She thinks of the children she has lost, the friends buried in frozen soil, the girls promised into marriages they did not choose. She lets the tears fall only briefly, then wipes them away, for there is always another day, another chore, another demand waiting for her. Through it all, she finds strength in rituals both small and sacred. The offering of bread to the household gods, the careful carving of runes into wood for protection, the songs she hums while working at her loom. These acts tie her to the unseen world, to ancestors who endured before her, to spirits who watch even when the gods feel distant. She may not control her fate, but she can shape her days, and in that shaping lies a quiet form of power. Life for Viking women is brutal, not only because of hunger, cold and death, but because of the silence in which they endure. Their names are rarely spoken, their deeds rarely recorded, yet without them, the fires would go out, the fields would lie barren, the children would not survive. They are the unseen foundation of their world, the steady flame in a landscape of storms. And as the snow buries the village once again, she wraps her children in cloaks she has woven, places another log on the fire, and sits by the hearth with her spindle in hand. The cycle continues, unbroken, demanding, and she, as always, meets it with quiet, unyielding strength. The first thaw of spring brings with it not only mud and renewal, but also whispers of departures. Ships are prepared once more, their hulls repaired with tar and timber, their sails stiff and strong from the wool spun through countless winter nights. Men gather at the shoreline, boasting of far-off lands and treasures waiting beyond the sea. For the women, the sound of hammering and shouting is not a call to adventure, but a reminder of the long silence to come, of the waiting that gnaws deeper than hunger. The woman watches as her husband sharpens his axe, his eyes fixed on horizons she will never see. She does not stop him. She cannot. It is the way of things. Men chase glory, women anchor the home. Yet her heart twists with each strike of the whetstone, with each bag packed for the voyage. She has endured this parting before, and she will endure it again, though endurance does not make it easier. She hides her fear behind a composed face, for her children watch her closely. If she falters, so will they. On the morning of departure, the village gathers at the water's edge. The ships rock gently, their dragon-headed prows glinting in the pale sunlight. Men clasp hands, shout farewells, and speak of victories to come. Women stand a step back, silent, holding their children's hands tightly. The woman's husband kisses her briefly, more out of duty than passion, then boards the ship. She feels the absence the moment his boots leave the ground. The sails rise, the oars dip, and slowly the ships slip into the distance until they are nothing but specks swallowed by the sea. The shore empties, the silence heavier than before. She turns back toward the village, shoulders squared, her mind already shifting to the tasks that will define the months ahead. The fields await, the livestock need tending, the household must run as if nothing has changed. For though half the village has vanished, life for the women has only grown harder. With the men gone, the village feels exposed. Every creak in the night, every rustle in the trees carries the weight of threat. Raiders could come, wild beasts could wander near, misfortune could strike without warning. The woman sleeps lightly, a knife by her side, always listening for danger. Her body is weary from the day's work, but her mind never truly rests. Survival demands vigilance, and vigilance demands sacrifice. Yet, even in this fear, there is a strange sense of freedom. Without men, the women's voices carry differently. Decisions about fields, about food, about disputes among neighbours fall to them. They are the rulers of the home, and in many ways, of the village itself. This power is not spoken of openly, but it exists quietly acknowledged in the way tasks are shared, the way children are disciplined, the way disputes are settled, without waiting for men to return. For a season, the women are the keepers, not just of households, but of an entire community. Still, the burden is crushing. A failed crop, a sick animal, a spoiled barrel of fish, each disaster falls on her shoulders. There is no one else to blame, no one else to fix it. She learns to act quickly, to solve problems without hesitation. She stitches wounds, calms storms of fear, teaches her children to take on duties far beyond their years. Her daughters learn the spindle and the loom, their fingers clumsy but growing more skilled each day. Her sons drive the animals to pasture, their voices still high but carrying responsibility that bends their backs like men. Childhood in this world is brief. The seasons roll onward as relentless as the tide. Summer is labour, autumn is harvest, winter is endurance. Each year is a repetition of the last, yet each year brings new challenges. A storm that destroys crops, a disease that sweeps through livestock, a famine that lingers like a curse. The woman meets each one with grim determination, never allowing despair to break her outward strength. She knows her children's eyes are always upon her. If she yields, so will they. There are nights when she dreams of a different life, one where her days are not consumed by survival, one where she can rest without fear of hunger or loss. In those dreams she hears laughter, her own, unburdened and free. But dreams are fragile, and morning always shatters them. She rises, ties back her hair, and begins again. When word finally comes of the ships, weeks, months, sometimes years later, it arrives in fragments. A trader passing through with news of battles in distant lands. A wounded man who limps home, bearing tales of storms and enemies. Sometimes the word is good. Her husband is alive, wealthy, returning soon. Other times it is grim. He has fallen in battle, his body left where it fell, his name carried only in sagas sung by men who value victory over mourning. If he returns, she greets him with composure, though her heart is a storm of relief, resentment, and exhaustion. He does not see the months of labour etched into her hands, the sleepless nights, the griefs buried in silence. He speaks of silver, of raids, of blood and fire. She listens, because she must. Yet she knows that without her, the home he has returned to would be nothing but ashes and emptiness. And if he does not return, she carries on as before. She cannot collapse into grief, for grief does not feed children or keep fires burning. She buries her sorrow beneath labour, beneath routine, beneath the endless rhythm of survival. In time, she may remarry, not out of love, but out of necessity. In her world, security is not found in solitude. Life for Viking women is brutal because it demands everything, their bodies, their strength, their voices, their silence. It is not one battle fought and won, but 1,000 small wars waged daily, unseen and unremembered. And yet they endure, because endurance is the only choice given to them. As the sun sets over the village, casting long shadows across the fjord, she sits by the fire, her children clustered close. She weaves wool into thread, her hands steady, her voice soft as she tells them stories of gods and heroes. Her life may never be sung in sagas, but her strength lives on in every stitch, every breath, every heartbeat that carries her people into another day. The world of the Vikings was bound not only by earth and sea, but also by belief. For the woman, faith was not a matter of temples or priests alone. It was woven into every task, every meal, every breath. Each morning, as she lit the fire, she whispered to the household spirits, the Landvatir, guardians of the land and home. A piece of bread might be set aside as offering. A few drops of milk spilled onto the ground in respect. These small rituals were not luxuries. They were protections, shields against a world always ready to take more than it gave. In times of sickness, she turned to charms and runes carved into wood, whispering words passed down from her mother and her mother before that. She knew the herbs of the forest: yarrow for wounds, juniper for cleansing, garlic for strength. When her child burned with fever, she pressed leaves to the skin, murmuring prayers to Ea, the goddess of healing. If the child lived, it was a blessing. If the child died, it was fate. The line between life and death was thin, and faith was the thread that kept her from despair. Women in her world held a strange, quiet place in the realm of the spiritual. Though the grand feasts and sacrifices were led by men, the everyday rituals of life belonged to women. They were keepers of the hearth, interpreters of dreams, singers of lullabies that echoed with ancient meaning. Some women were believed to have deeper powers still. The Vola, seeresses who wandered from village to village, cloaked in mystery, their staffs carved with symbols of fate. These women were feared as much as they were respected. They spoke of destinies, of battles yet to come, of the will of the gods. And though not every woman was a seeress, all were seen as having a closeness to the unseen, a thread to the spiritual world through their roles as mothers and keepers of the home. The woman herself was not a seeress, but she felt the weight of that expectation. When a storm tore through the fields, she was asked what signs she had noticed, what dreams had warned of such loss. When a neighbour's child sickened, she was expected to offer advice, to mix herbs, to chant words of protection. She bore this role with care, not because she claimed power, but because to refuse would mean blame. If a cure worked, it was thanks to the gods. If it failed, it was often the fault of the one who tried. In this way, women carried not only labour but also responsibility for the unseen forces of life. Festivals punctuated the year, marking the cycles of the seasons. During Yule, in the deep of winter, the household gathered for 12 nights of feasting, hoping to honour the gods enough to secure survival for the coming year. She prepared the food, brewed the ale, kept the fires bright through the endless nights. Yet even in celebration, there was unease. It was believed that the dead walked during Yule, and she made offerings for them too. A bowl of porridge left out in silence so that wandering spirits would not bring misfortune. The weight of the gods pressed on her daily decisions. To spill salt was ill luck. To dream of certain animals was an omen. To hear the cry of ravens might mean death. She carried these beliefs like another tool, another weapon against the harshness of her world. For her, religion was not abstract. It was practical, lived, immediate. It was the difference between hope and despair in a life where so little could be controlled. There were moments when her faith brought her comfort. The stories of the gods mirrored her own struggles. Freya, who wept golden tears for her lost husband. Frigg, who knew the pain of watching her child fated to die. Idun, whose apples of youth reminded her of the fragility of life. These goddesses were not distant, unreachable figures. They were reflections of herself, of her neighbours, of every woman who carried burdens without recognition. In their myths she found kinship. But faith was also another weight. Sacrifices had to be made, rituals carried out, failures explained. If crops withered, had she not given enough offerings? If sickness lingered, had she not prayed with enough devotion? The gods were powerful, but they were also unpredictable, demanding and sometimes cruel. In this, her life mirrored her faith. Both brutal, both requiring endless endurance. Her children grew up in this world of ritual and story. She taught them the signs, the prayers, the meanings of dreams. Her daughters learned the chants for protection. Her sons learned the runes scratched into wood. She watched their eyes widen at tales of Thor's hammer, of Odin's wandering, of Loki's tricks. In these tales she gave them not just entertainment, but a framework to understand their world. A world where storms, sickness and hunger were never random, but threads in a larger tapestry woven by unseen hands. The spiritual weight was heavy, but it was also one of the few places where women's voices carried openly. A man might swing a sword, but it was a woman who whispered the words to protect him as he left, who tied charms into his cloak, who prayed over his ship as it vanished into the sea. She was not celebrated for it, but she knew, without her, even the bravest warrior walked into battle unguarded. As autumn turned to winter again, she stood by the hearth, sprinkling a few grains of barley into the flames, her lips moving in quiet prayer. Outside, the wind howled, the land slept beneath snow, and death lingered always at the edge of the firelight. But within, she wove faith into the fabric of survival, another invisible thread that kept her family alive. Her life was bound not just to earth and labour, but to gods, spirits, and fate. And though her name may never be carved into stone, her whispered prayers echoed through the generations, shaping a world that balanced precariously between brutality and belief. The longhouse stands at the centre of her life, not just a shelter but the very heart of existence. Built of timber and turf, its roof thick with thatch, it is both fortress and prison. Within its walls, daily life unfolds in a rhythm as old as memory itself. Smoke from the hearth curls upward, filling the rafters, clinging to beams, staining the air until every breath carries the taste of fire. The light is dim, the air heavy, yet this is where she spends nearly all of her days. The hearth divides the space, one side for the family, the other for the animals during the harshest winters. The crackle of flames mixes with the lowing of cows, the bleating of goats, the restless stamping of hooves. To live so close to animals is both necessity and burden. Their warmth protects the family, their milk and meat sustain them, their hides provide clothing and shelter. Yet they bring with them filth, noise, and the constant reminder that survival is tethered not only to human strength but also to the fragile health of beasts. She cleans their pens, tends their wounds, and prays over them as much as she does her children. Her space in the longhouse is defined by tools of labour, the loom against the wall, baskets of wool waiting to be spun, pots for cooking, knives for butchering, and wooden bowls worn smooth by years of use. Every object tells a story of toil. Each thread on the loom is a thread of her life, each pot of stew a measure of her endurance. There is no corner of the longhouse untouched by her hands, no part of its rhythm not shaped by her labour. Meals are simple, repetitive, built on what the land can give and what she can preserve. Fish dried on racks, meat salted in barrels, bread dense and heavy with coarse grain. She works tirelessly to stretch each meal, to make enough for hungry mouths without wasting a single crumb. When food runs low in winter, she cuts her own portions smaller, giving more to her children. Hunger gnaws at her stomach in silence, but she never speaks of it. To complain would bring no relief, only despair. Evenings bring the small rituals of family life. Children gather near the fire, their faces glowing in the flickering light. She mends clothing by the flames, her needle moving steadily through worn fabric. Stories rise in her voice, not just of gods and heroes, but of ancestors, of lessons learned through hardship. These stories are not just for comfort, they are instruction, teaching her children how to live, how to endure, how to read the signs of the land and the will of the gods. Her voice shapes them as surely as her loom shapes cloth. Privacy is a luxury she does not know. The longhouse holds many souls. Children, extended family, sometimes even neighbours when storms make travel impossible. Every sound, every argument, every grief is shared. A child's birth, a woman's labour, a man's sickness, all unfold before watching eyes. She learns to carry herself with composure, to shield her emotions behind a mask of steadiness. To break down in tears would not only expose her vulnerability, but also unsettle those who depend on her strength. And so, she endures in silence, her grief buried as deeply as her joy. The brutality of childbirth remains a constant shadow over her life. Each time her belly swells, she knows she steps once more onto a battlefield of blood and pain. She prepares herbs, gathers women of the household to assist, and prays for strength. Sometimes the cries of a newborn fill the longhouse, a fragile sound that brings relief and joy. Other times there is only silence and the fire crackles too loudly in the background. She has lost children before, as many women do, and though her hands return quickly to work, the emptiness lingers in her eyes long after. Children who survive grow quickly into labourers, From the time they can walk, they carry wood, fetch water, gather herbs, and learn to weave. Her daughters learn to spin wool, their fingers fumbling but eager. Her sons tend to animals, their voices still high, yet carrying the weight of responsibility. She watches them with pride but also sorrow, knowing their innocence is short-lived. There is no time for prolonged childhood in this world. Every hand must contribute. Every life must justify its place at the table. At times, the longhouse becomes a place of gathering beyond the family. Feasts, celebrations, and rituals fill the space with voices and laughter. She works harder than anyone in these moments, preparing food, brewing ale, arranging benches and bedding for guests. She smiles faintly, though her body aches, because these gatherings bind the village together. Alliances are formed, marriages arranged, disputes settled. She may not speak in the loudest voices, but her labour makes these gatherings possible. Without her work, there would be no feast, no celebration, no memory of abundance. And yet, despite its role as the centre of life, the longhouse is also a reminder of confinement. The woman rarely travels beyond the fields, rarely sees the wider world her husband describes in stories of raids and voyages. Her horizon is bounded by the walls she tends, the hearth she feeds, the land she sows. Her world is small, yet within it she carries the weight of generations. She may not see distant lands, but her hands clothe those who do. She may not plunder riches, but her labour makes survival possible for those who chase glory. The brutality of her life is not marked by battles or swords, but by the endless grinding cycle of hunger and endurance within the walls of the longhouse. It is a life rarely sung, rarely remembered, yet it is the foundation upon which all the sagas of men are built. And as she sits by the fire, her spindle turning, her children drowsy beside her, the truth is plain. Without her, the longhouse would be cold, silent, and empty. With her, it remains alive. A fragile island of warmth in a world that offers little mercy. Beyond the walls of her longhouse lies a village that breathes and struggles much like her own body. Every family bound together by necessity. Every life intertwined in ways both tender and harsh. The village is not large, but it is the whole world to her. A cluster of homes pressed close against the biting wind, their smoke rising like fragile threads into the endless northern sky. Paths of trampled earth connect each dwelling, worn smooth by countless footsteps, by the carrying of wood, by the daily march of buckets filled with water from the stream. Her role in this village is unspoken, yet undeniable. While men are remembered as warriors and traders, women are the web that holds the community together. They meet at the riverbanks, their hands raw from scrubbing linen against stone, sharing stories in murmured voices. They gather to churn butter, to weave wool, to grind grain into coarse flour. In these shared labours, bonds are formed, alliances of necessity, networks of quiet strength. No feast, no harvest, no winter survival is possible without this sisterhood of endurance. Yet the village is also a place of watchful eyes. Every action is noticed, every word weighed. A woman's reputation is as fragile as glass, easily cracked by rumour. If her child grows thin in winter, whispers might spread that she has failed to ration food. If her husband does not return from sea, tongues might wag that she did not pray enough, or that her fate is a punishment from the gods. She carries not only her family's survival, but also its honour, and honour is as sharp a burden as hunger. Disputes rise often in such close quarters. A fence built too far into a neighbour's land, a goat that strays into another's field, an argument over inheritance when a man dies at sea. Men may resolve these conflicts publicly, but much of the quiet negotiation happens between women. She has learned the art of soft words, of diplomacy disguised as kindness. A gift of bread, a shared spool of yarn, a whispered apology can settle what anger alone might not. Though her influence is seldom named aloud, she shapes peace within the village as surely as the men who swing swords abroad. The social order is strict and each person knows their place. Children respect elders, women manage households, men pursue war and trade. Yet within these roles, women carve their own forms of authority. She holds the keys to her longhouse, a symbol of her command over its wealth and its walls. She directs the use of food, the care of livestock, the rhythm of daily life. To outsiders, her power may seem small, but in truth, the village could not survive without her steady governance. Marriage remains one of the village's strongest threads, binding families into alliances. She has seen it again and again. A girl scarcely grown given to a man twice her age, her dowry exchanged in livestock or tools, her body considered part of the bargain. The woman remembers her own marriage in this way, not chosen, but arranged. She did not love her husband at first, perhaps never truly did, but she respected him as duty required. She knows her daughter's futures will follow the same path, and though her heart aches, she teaches them how to endure it with dignity, how to bend without breaking. Not all marriages are cruel, but few are tender. Affection is rare, a luxury not often indulged. Love may bloom quietly, in stolen glances, or in the way a man spares his wife from a harsh word, but it is seldom the root of union. Instead, what grows is companionship of a different kind. Two people bound by necessity, by survival, by the children they raise together. It is not romance as tales might promise, but it is enough to endure the winters side by side. In moments of festivity, the village comes alive. During seasonal gatherings, drums beat, voices rise in song, and torches illuminate the night. Men boast of raids, women pour ale, children dance at the edges of firelight. For an evening, the hardship of life is blurred, softened by mead and music. Yet even here, women work without rest, preparing food, tending fires, soothing the youngest children to sleep. While men's laughter fills the hall, women's labour ensures the celebration does not collapse into chaos. The laws of the village, though written in runes and upheld by men, touch her life deeply. She knows she can, in theory, divorce her husband if he mistreats her, reclaim her dowry, hold land in her own right. These laws are whispered among women with a kind of reverence, for they offer more protection than many women in distant lands might have. But rights on paper are not always rights in practice. A woman who stands too boldly risks scorn, suspicion, or worse, and so she moves carefully, using her wisdom and her silence as weapons sharper than any blade. When winter strikes, the village closes in on itself, each family retreating to their longhouses. But even then, connection persists. Women trade stories through cracks in the walls. They send children running between houses with bowls of stew or scraps of cloth. The village breathes as one body, every household a limb, every woman a heartbeat. If one family falters, all feel the strain. If one thrives, it offers hope that survival is possible for all. Through this web of community, the woman finds her place. She is not alone in her struggle, though her burdens feel singular. She is part of a living tapestry of women who rise each dawn, who weave, cook, heal, hug, and bury their grief in silence. Their names will not echo in halls, but their strength echoes in every life that continues through the brutal rhythm of the north. As she walks through the village paths at dusk, the air crisp with frost, she hears the murmur of voices, the lowing of cattle, the crackle of fires within every home. This is her world, small, harsh, unyielding, but alive because of her and women like her. And though the sagas may not remember their names, the village itself, in all its fragile persistence, is their legacy. The sea was both lifeline and thief. For the woman, its restless tides were a constant presence, a force that shaped every season of her life. She stood often at the edge of the shore where the waves lapped cold against stone, her eyes searching the horizon as if it might yield answers. Ships departed with promises of wealth, only to vanish into mist and storm. Some returned heavy with silver, with slaves, with goods that glimmered in the firelight. Others never returned at all. The sea did not explain itself. It gave and it took without mercy. Her husband's life was bound to the sea, and so by extension hers was too. She felt each departure like a tearing wound, hidden beneath her composed face. When he returned, sometimes with riches, sometimes broken and thin, she welcomed him with the steadiness that survival demanded. She did not ask for stories of violence or raids, though she heard them anyway. He spoke of villages burned, of men slain, of treasures seized. She nodded, but her mind lingered on the faces of those women far away, women who, like her, endured lives shaped by others' ambitions. She wondered if they too waited at their shores, if they wept when ships did not come back, if their prayers sounded the same in different tongues. The sea's power was not only in the distance it created, but also in the danger it brought to her own village. Sometimes foreign sails appeared on the horizon, and fear swept through the people like fire through dry grass. Women gathered children close, ready to flee into the woods, or defend their homes with whatever tools lay at hand. She knew that raiders did not spare women and children. To them, they were prizes, tokens of conquest. Stories whispered of women taken across seas, forced into servitude in strange lands. She pushed these thoughts away, but the fear remained like a shadow at her shoulder. Trade, too, came across the sea. Foreign merchants brought amber, silk and spices, goods from lands she would never see. She touched them with awe, yet with suspicion, for each item was a reminder of the distance between her small world and the vast unknown beyond. The men saw riches, she saw fragility. What good was silk when winter gnawed at the bones? What use was amber when the harvest failed? And yet, she knew these goods mattered, for they were the currency of power. With them, her husband bought alliances, respect, perhaps even temporary peace. Sometimes she dreamed of the sea not as enemy, but as escape. She imagined stepping onto a ship, leaving behind the endless cycle of fields, hearth and longhouse. She pictured distant shores where no one knew her name, where she might walk freely without the weight of duty. But dreams are fragile things, and she knew her place was not upon the waves. Her world was bound to earth and fire, not wind and water. The sea belonged to men, even as it claimed women's lives in silence. Storms reminded her of this truth more than anything else. When the wind howled and the waves rose like walls of black glass, she lay awake in the longhouse, listening. Every creak of timber, every gust rattling the roof, was a reminder that her husband might be somewhere out there, fighting not men but the sea itself. She prayed then, not for victory but for survival. If he lived, he would return to her. If he did not, she would endure, because she must. The sea gave her fish, it gave her salt, it gave her driftwood for fires. Yet it also gave her sorrow, uncertainty and fear. It was a constant companion. It's always in her ears, its moods shaping her days. She taught her children to respect it, never to turn their backs on the waves, never to take more than they needed, always to give thanks for its gifts. But she also taught them its cruelty, that the sea was not a friend, no matter how calm it seemed. When her husband spoke of voyages, she listened, though she could not truly imagine the places he described. Vast kingdoms to the east, green lands to the west, towns of stone to the south. These were worlds she would never touch, yet they shaped her life more than the soil beneath her feet. For each voyage decided whether she would face another winter with plenty or with hunger, with companionship or with loss. In her heart, she carried a quiet resentment for the sea, though she never spoke it aloud. Men praised it, worshipped it almost, for the power it gave them. She knew better. She saw not only the silver it brought, but also the graves it dug. She had buried too many neighbours who waited for ships that never came home. She had comforted too many widows whose lives shrank into shadows after the sea claimed their husbands, yet still she endured. She did not turn her back on the water, because to do so would be to deny the truth of her life. The sea was both giver and destroyer, and in that balance she found her own reflection. For she too was both. She gave life through childbirth, she preserved it through labour, and she carried the silent grief of all that was lost. On quiet evenings, when the horizon glowed with fading light, she stood once more at the shore. The waves lapped at her feet, endless and unbroken. She closed her eyes and listened, hearing in the sea the same song she heard in her own blood. Relentless, brutal and eternal. It was the song of survival, and though it never offered peace, it carried her forward all the same. In the northern world, law was not carved only into stone or sung in great halls. It was lived daily, shaping the quiet struggles of women as much as the loud triumphs of men. The woman knew this well. She was bound by rules that offered her certain protections, yet also confined her to paths she had not chosen. Every aspect of her life was tied to custom, to agreements spoken before witnesses, to bargains struck between families. Marriage itself was not simply a union of two souls, but a contract, sealed with dowries, property, and the weight of family honour. When she was young, her hand had been promised before she could truly understand what it meant. Her father spoke on her behalf, her brothers nodded in agreement, and she was given away like a piece of land or livestock. This was the way of things. She accepted it not because she wished to, but because refusal was not an option. Even her dowry, clothing, livestock, sometimes land, was not hers to use freely, but a tether that tied her worth to her family's standing. Yet within these harsh boundaries, there were small glimmers of autonomy. She knew that if her husband mistreated her, if he struck her or failed to provide for her, she could seek divorce. She could reclaim her dowry, return to her family, and even remarry. These rights, rare compared to the lives of women in distant lands, were spoken of almost reverently among women. But she also knew the truth. Law in theory was not always law in practice. A woman who sought divorce risked her reputation, her children, her place in the community. She could act, yes, but she would pay for it in whispers, in suspicion, in the slow erosion of trust. Inheritance, too, was tangled in both opportunity and limitation. She might inherit land if no sons survived, or manage property while her husband was away. She might hold keys to the home, symbols of authority over the household's goods, but always her power was conditional. A man could question her choices, could claim her work, could override her decisions with louder words and stronger hands. She learned to navigate carefully, to bend where she could not resist, to assert herself where silence would mean loss. Even her role as mother was bound by law. Her sons carried the family name, the legacy of land and blood. Her daughters carried dowries and the promise of alliances. She loved them all, but she knew that her daughters' futures were not theirs to shape, just as her own had not been. She whispered strength into their ears at night, teaching them not only how to weave wool and bake bread, but how to endure the choices made for them, how to survive within the cage of custom. The law reached even into her grief. When her husband's fate was uncertain, lost at sea, perhaps dead, perhaps not, she was trapped in limbo. She could not remarry, could not claim widowhood until proof of his death was offered. Months, even years, could pass in silence, and she would remain neither wife nor widow, her life paused by rules she did not write. This was its own kind of cruelty, as brutal as hunger or cold. The cruelty of uncertainty stretched across endless days. Disputes in the village often brought her into the shadow of law. If livestock strayed, if fences were moved, if property lines blurred, men gathered to argue and judge. Yet behind them stood women, whispering advice, urging restraint, offering compromise. Her influence was quiet, but it was there, shaping decisions from the shadows. She understood that her voice, when spoken too boldly, might be silenced, but when spoken with care, could tilt the balance of an argument. She learned the art of subtlety, wielding influence not like a blade, but like a thread woven invisibly through cloth. There were stories, too, of women who defied the laws outright, women who took up arms, who claimed land, who refused to be silenced. These tales spread in whispers, half in admiration, half in warning. Some women envied them, others feared them. The woman herself listened with quiet curiosity, wondering what it might feel like to live without restraint, to seize control rather than navigate within it. But she also knew the price of defiance, exile, scorn, even death. The sagas might remember such women, but their villages often cursed them. And so she endured within the laws, bending them where she could, bowing where she must. Her power was not in grand defiance, but in persistence, in shaping her world quietly, patiently. When her husband returned from sea with silver, she stretched it into tools, clothing, food, ensuring that the family truly benefited. When neighbours quarrelled, she turned sharp words into softer ones, protecting fragile alliances. When her daughters reached marrying age, she whispered to them the truths no one else would say, preparing them for lives bound by the same chains. The brutality of her world was not only in hunger or cold, but in the invisible walls built by law and custom. These walls hemmed her in, silenced her dreams, and claimed her body and her choices before she even knew herself. Yet within those walls she carved spaces of survival, of influence, of strength that few would ever see. At night, when the fire burned low and her children slept, she sometimes stared at the beams of the longhouse roof, wondering if freedom was anything more than a dream. Perhaps in another life she might have walked her own path, chosen her own husband, held her own land without question. But here, in this life, freedom was not hers to claim. What she had instead was endurance, the ability to survive laws that were written against her, to find power in silence, and to teach her children how to live within a world that demanded so much and gave so little. Seasons pass, and with them the woman ages. Her hair, once dark and thick, begins to silver like frost upon the fields. The lines around her eyes deepen, carved not by vanity's clock, but by the weight of endless labour, worry and survival. In the north, few women live long enough to grow truly old, but those who do carry their years as both burden and badge. She has survived childbirths, famines, storms and winters that seemed endless. Each wrinkle is a story, each ache in her bones a memory of work done when her body begged for rest. In youth, her strength was measured in speed, how quickly she could harvest, how tirelessly she could weave, how many children she could bear. Now her strength is measured in endurance, in wisdom, in her ability to guide others through the same hardships she once faced. Her daughters come to her with questions, her sons with problems they cannot solve. Neighbours look to her when disputes arise. Though her body may tire more quickly, her presence holds authority earned over decades of survival. Still, aging in her world is not softened by gentleness. There are no medicines to ease her joints, no comforts to soothe her weary muscles. Each morning she rises with pain in her knees, her back stiff, her hands trembling slightly as she lights the fire. Yet she does not complain. Complaints do not fill bowls or mend cloaks. She carries her pain in silence, as she has always carried everything. The brutality of aging is sharpened by the constant shadow of mortality. She has buried children, neighbours, perhaps even her husband if the sea claimed him. Each loss etches itself into her heart, yet she continues, because there is no choice. Grief cannot stop the loom from spinning or the pot from boiling. Instead, grief becomes a companion, as familiar as hunger or cold. She weaves it into her work, into the stories she tells at night, into the lessons she passes to her grandchildren. If she is fortunate, her later years bring some measure of respect. In her village, the words of older women can carry weight, especially when tied to memory. She remembers which fields have failed, which winters were harshest, which herbs heal best. She knows the signs of the sky, the moods of the sea, the ways of animals. In her, knowledge lives that no book or rune has captured, only the unbroken chain of mothers teaching daughters, of women passing survival to women. But old age can also bring vulnerability. A widow without sons may find her place precarious, her home threatened, her security fragile. Younger men may circle, eager to claim her land or her dowry. Younger women, strong with the energy of youth, may forget the burdens she once carried. In such moments, her authority flickers, and she must lean on the loyalty of her children, on the respect she has built across a lifetime of sacrifice. Her memories grow heavy, but they are also her treasure. She remembers the births, the songs, the feasts, when laughter filled the longhouse despite hunger lurking beyond the door. She remembers the touch of small hands on her cheek, the smell of bread baking, the warmth of fire against her face after a day in the snow. She also remembers loss. The sound of silence after a child's cry fades, the emptiness of a bed when her husband is gone, the endless waiting at the shore for ships that never return. These memories are woven together, joy and sorrow inseparable, as tangled as the threads she once spun. At night, when the fire is low and the children are asleep, she sits quietly with her spindle. Her hands move more slowly now, but they still move. The thread slips between her fingers, thin but unbroken. She hums softly, her voice low, carrying a song older than she is, a song that perhaps her own mother once sang. In the flickering shadows, she feels herself as part of something larger, a chain of women stretching backward into the past and forward into the future, each one carrying the same burdens, the same strength, the same silence. There is no glory in her story, no sagas sung of her name. Yet without her, there would be no sagas at all. The men who carve their names into history, who boast of raids and treasures, stand only because women like her kept the fires burning, the fields alive, the children fed. Her life may be brutal, but it is also the foundation of everything, and as her body weakens, her spirit endures. She is not remembered in stone, but in the faces of her children, in the warmth of the cloaks they wear, in the stories they will whisper long after she is gone. Her legacy is not in battle, but in survival. And survival, in her world, is the greatest victory of all. The nights grow longer, and with them the woman begins to sense her own story drawing toward its quiet end. She does not fear death, for death has been her companion all her life. She has seen it in the faces of infants who never took a second breath, in neighbours buried beneath frozen earth, in husbands who vanished into storms. To live in the north is to live alongside death, not as a stranger, but as a shadow always waiting. Yet now, as her body weakens and her steps slow, she feels that shadow more closely than before. In her world, there are no grand burials for women like her. The sagas tell of great warriors, laid to rest with swords and treasures, their names carried by skalds for generations. For her, death will be simpler, quieter. Perhaps she will be buried with the tools of her life, a spindle, a set of keys, a simple brooch to fasten her cloak. These are not the symbols of conquest, but they are symbols of survival, of labour that built the very foundation of her people. To her children, they will mean more than swords ever could. Still, she wonders about what lies beyond. The old stories promise many paths. Warriors go to Valhalla, feasting forever in Odin's hall. Farmers may find themselves in the fields of Folkvanga, where Freyja welcomes the chosen. Others speak of hell, not as punishment, but as a place of quiet, cold rest. She does not know which fate awaits her, and perhaps it does not matter. What matters is that her children will carry on, that her work will not vanish with her last breath. That is enough. In her final seasons, she begins to give away pieces of herself. A cloak she has worn for years is passed to her daughter, who will need it for winters yet to come. A carved wooden spoon, smoothed by decades of use, is placed in the hands of a grandchild. Each gift is small, but each carries weight, for they are more than objects. They are fragments of memory, threads of a life spent in endurance. She wants her family to hold these pieces and remember not her weariness, but her strength. When her body no longer allows her to work as she once did, she turns more to stories. She sits by the hearth, her hands folded in her lap, her voice carrying through the longhouse as she tells of gods and spirits, of ancestors and forgotten lands. The children lean close, their eyes wide in the firelight. They do not yet understand that these stories are not only entertainment, but inheritance. She is giving them little resilience, the lessons that will guide them long after she is gone. Her voice may fade, but the stories will remain, alive in their hearts. There is tenderness in these final days, though it is wrapped in the roughness of survival. Her daughters bring her food before she asks. Her sons chop wood in her stead. She feels their care in small gestures. A blanket pulled higher, a bowl of stew placed gently at her side. They do not speak of her weakness, for words are unnecessary. In their silence she hears their love, and it comforts her more than any wealth or fame could. Sometimes she dreams of her youth, of running barefoot across fields in summer, of her mother's voice calling her in from the river, of the first time she held her newborn child. These memories come to her like soft shadows, blurred at the edges, yet filled with warmth. They remind her that though her life was hard, it was not without beauty. Even in brutality, there were moments of laughter, of love, of light. The village, too, begins to sense her fading. Neighbours visit more often, bringing bread, cheese, a flask of mead. They speak of the past, of winters survived together, of births and weddings long gone. They honour her, not with songs or feasts, but with presence, with recognition that her endurance has shaped them all. For though her name will not be written in sagas, her influence lives in every family that survived, because she laboured, because she endured. As the cold deepens once more, she feels her strength slipping further away. She is not afraid. She sits by the fire, her children and grandchildren gathered close, and she smiles faintly. The flames crackle, shadows dance upon the walls, and she feels the circle of life complete itself. She has given everything, her youth, her body, her voice, her years. Nothing remains to be taken from her. Her eyes close and she breathes deeply, letting the warmth of the fire sink into her bones. She knows that when she is gone, her family will continue the cycle, facing the same hardships, carrying the same burdens, whispering the same prayers. And perhaps when her grandchildren grow old, they will tell their children of her, not as a figure of legend, but as the woman who kept the fire burning when the world outside was dark and cold. In that memory, she will live on. And though her life was brutal, it was not in vain. It was the thread that bound her people together, a thread spun strong enough to endure beyond her final breath. Winter settles heavy upon the land once more, and the woman's longhouse breathes with silence. Her place by the hearth, once constant and commanding, is now empty. The spindle rests untouched, the loom stands still, and the fire crackles without her hands to guide it. Her family mourns quietly, not with wailing, but with the kind of grief that slips into daily life, felt in the absence of her steady presence, in the emptiness of her quiet humming, in the way the house seems colder without her. Her burial is simple, as most women's were. There is no great mound, no scold to sing of her deeds. She is wrapped in the cloak she wore through countless winters, her body laid upon the earth with tokens of her life. A brooch, a key, perhaps a spindle. Symbols not of conquest, but of care. These are the tools that carried her family through hunger, through storms, through years that might have broken lesser spirits. The earth closes over her and the village returns to its rhythm. Life does not pause in the north, not even for grief. Yet her legacy lingers in ways no grave can contain. Each time her daughter spins wool, she hears her mother's voice guiding her hands. Each time her son tends the fields, he remembers the patience she taught, the way she read the soil as if it spoke to her. Her grandchildren carry her stories in their dreams, repeating them by firelight, never knowing where the tale ends and where memory begins. Through them, she endures. The sagas will not remember her. Skalds sing of warriors, kings and gods, not of women who bent their backs to sow barley in stubborn earth, or who stitched sails by candlelight so that ships could reach distant shores. But the truth is that the sagas are built upon her labour. Every victory sung in mead halls rests on cloaks she wove, on food she stored, on children she raised. The men may be remembered as heroes, but it was women like her who kept the world alive. The brutality of her life was not in grand battles, but in the relentless demand for endurance, hunger, childbirth, loss and silence. These were her wars. She fought them not with sword and shield, but with patience, strength and a will that refused to break. And though history may call her invisible, her existence shaped everything. Without her, the longhouse would fall cold. Without her, the village would wither. Without her, the Viking age itself would not have endured. In the long winters after her death, when the firelight flickers and the winds howl against the walls, her family speaks of her softly. Not with the exaggeration of legend, but with the intimacy of memory. They remember her hands, rough and scarred, but gentle in their touch. They remember her eyes, steady and sharp, always seeing what needed to be done. They remember her voice, quiet but firm, weaving both stories and survival into their lives. Perhaps that is the truest form of immortality, not in songs sung for strangers, but in the quiet persistence of memory, carried by those who loved her. Her name may fade, her grave may vanish beneath grass and snow, but her strength continues, woven into the generations that follow. Each child who grows strong, each winter that is survived, each fire that burns against the darkness is her legacy. And so, though her life was brutal, it was also profound. She was never crowned with gold or praised in halls, yet she was the hidden queen of her world, ruling through endurance, through labour, through the quiet power of love and survival. The Viking age belonged as much to her as to any warrior, though history chose not to say her name. The story of her life is not written in runes or carved upon stone, but it is etched deeply into the fabric of time itself. She was the fire keeper, the weaver, the mother, the silent strength of a people. And while the world remembers axes and ships, it is women like her who remind us that survival itself is the greatest saga ever told.